cremation chamber was being prepared to ignite when the dead boy started banging on the glass, and the entire staff screamed in horror and stopped everything. Before I even start this story, I want you to tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because once you hear what happened to the boy later, you won't forget it. The cremation chamber was already humming quietly, its steel doors sealed shut, and the red warning light above it had just flickered on. The staff at Willow Grove Funeral Home moved calmly, but with the precision of people who had repeated the same process countless times. They were preparing to ignite the furnace in less than 2 minutes. The paperwork was signed, the timing was confirmed, and inside, lying motionless on the stretcher, was the body of a boy who had been pronounced dead only hours earlier. His small frame was covered by a thin white sheet, his face pale, his lips slightly parted, his eyelids closed as if in a dreamless sleep. Everyone believed that his story had already ended, but in the suffocating silence of that room, something was about to happen that none of them would ever forget. Just as the engineer leaned over the panel to turn the ignition key, a deafening sound shattered the quiet. A pounding, desperate, rhythmic banging echoed from inside the chamber. At first, the staff froze, thinking it was their imagination, a cruel trick of nerves after a long shift. But then came the second sound, fists slamming frantically against the reinforced glass, and beneath it, muffled cries, weak but unmistakably human. "Help, please!" The boy was alive. The engineer's hands trembled so violently that the key slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the tiled floor. One of the attendants screamed and stumbled backward into a rack of equipment. Another ran to the panel, slamming the emergency stop button with his entire hand. The furnace lights dimmed instantly, and the growing hum died away into a heavy silence. Everyone stared at the glass window, their hearts hammering in their throats. There, in the half-darkness of the chamber, the boy's eyes were open. Wide, terrified, and filled with life. His fists pounded the glass again and again, leaving faint marks of sweat and blood where his knuckles hit the surface. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, and his lips moved, forming words no one wanted to believe were real. "Please, do not burn me." The room erupted into chaos. A woman in a gray uniform dropped the clipboard she was holding, papers scattering across the polished floor. One of the men sprinted to the intercom, yelling, "Get a doctor now, someone's alive in here." But his voice shook so much that he could barely form the words. Another attendant pulled at the furnace door handle, but it was locked tight, designed never to open once sealed without the proper sequence. His knuckles turned white as he pulled, cursing under his breath, his panic breaking through the professionalism drilled into him by years of routine. The boy's cries grew weaker, more desperate, as his fists slowed against the glass. Everyone in the room knew that seconds mattered. If the ignition had already been triggered, the flames would have swallowed him alive before anyone could stop it. The funeral director, a man named Michael Reeves, burst into the room at that moment. His tall frame filled the doorway, his suit wrinkled from a long day of grieving families and endless signatures. He took one look at the chamber and froze, his mind unable to accept what his eyes were telling him. The boy's pale face pressed against the glass, his mouth open, fogging the inside of the small window with each ragged breath. Michael's heart slammed against his ribs. "My God," he whispered. "He's alive in there." He pushed past his staff and grabbed the handle, his fingers fumbling at the release mechanism, his mind racing through the safety protocols he had memorized years ago but never imagined using in a moment like this. His staff shouted instructions, overlapping one another in sheer panic. "The override! Use the override! Where is the key? It fell, I saw it fall." The room was filled with frantic voices, the scrape of shoes against the tile, the crash of a tray knocked to the floor. And underneath it all, the pounding from the inside grew slower, weaker. Michael dropped to his knees, searching the floor with his trembling hands until his fingers closed around the small ignition key. He leapt back to the control panel, shoved the key into the slot, and twisted it hard to the left. A loud mechanical clank echoed through the room as the lock disengaged. The furnace door groaned and hissed as it cracked open, a wave of suffocating heat spilling out, even though the flames had never been ignited. Michael and 2 others pulled it wide with all their strength, and at last the stretcher rolled forward, the boy still strapped to it, his fists raw, his face wet with tears. He coughed violently, gasping for air as if he had just broken the surface of dark water. His eyes darted around the room, wide with terror. Everyone fell silent. The only sounds were his aspirate breaths, and the hammering of their own hearts. The woman in the gray uniform whispered through trembling lips, "But he was dead. They told us he was dead." Michael placed both hands on the stretcher, steadying himself as much as the boy. "He is not dead," he said hoarsely. "He was never dead." His mind reeled as the reality crashed down on him. A child had been declared deceased, placed into a chamber meant to consume him with fire, and only seconds before it was too late, he had fought his way back to life. It was a miracle, or the gravest mistake imaginable. The boy's voice cracked as he tried to speak. "Please do not let them put me back." His body shook with violent shivers, his small chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. His skin, though pale, was warm beneath the cold draft of the room, and that warmth told Michael everything he needed to know. Against all odds, the boy was alive, fragile and terrified, but alive. Michael barked orders to his stunned staff. "Get blankets. Call emergency services. Now, move." His voice cracked with urgency, and for the first time in their careers, the staff obeyed not out of routine but out of sheer desperation. They scrambled to wrap the boy in thick wool blankets, their own hands trembling as they touched his skin and felt the undeniable truth: warmth, breath, pulse. Life. As the sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, Michael remained by the stretcher, his hands gripping the metal frame. He could feel the boys shivering beneath the blankets, could see the wild fear still in his eyes. He leaned close, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "You are safe now. No one is going to hurt you. Do you hear me? You are safe." But deep down, Michael knew that nothing was safe anymore. Not the boy, not his staff, not even himself. Because the question that now loomed heavier than the silence in that room was one no one wanted to voice. How had this happened? How had a living child been mistaken for dead, nearly cremated alive? The boy closed his eyes, his lips trembling as he whispered something Michael barely caught. "My name is Daniel." His voice was faint, a fragile thread of sound, but it was enough to pierce through the horror of the moment. He was not just a body, not just a mistake. He was Daniel, a boy who had been buried alive in fire's shadow and clawed his way back with nothing but desperate fists and a will to survive. Michael tightened his grip on the stretcher as the doors of the funeral home burst open and paramedics rushed in. For the first time in decades, he felt the ground beneath his feet shift, as though the very foundation of his life's work had cracked open. Because in that room, in that moment, death had been cheated, and the line between the living and the dead had been torn apart. The paramedics rushed in with their equipment, the shrill cry of their radios filling the air. Michael stepped back only slightly, reluctant to let go of the stretcher, his knuckles still tight on the metal rail as though Daniel might vanish the moment he released him. The boy's lips moved faintly, but no sound followed. His eyes fluttered half shut, and the weak rise and fall of his chest made every adult in the room feel the weight of their own heartbeat. "Clear space. Everyone move," one of the medics barked, pushing through the cluster of funeral staff frozen in disbelief. He leaned over the boy, adjusting the blanket, and quickly placed 2 fingers against the side of his neck. His eyes widened. "He has a pulse. Weak, but it's there." His partner was already setting up the oxygen mask, her hands moving fast but steady, as if she had done this 1,000 times and yet knew she was in the middle of something extraordinary. The hiss of oxygen filled the silence as the mask settled over Daniel's small face. His chest rose just slightly higher, and the tension in the room cracked with relief. Michael exhaled for the first time in minutes, his shoulders sagging. But the relief lasted only a second before the horror returned. The boy should never have been in that furnace. A mistake so grave, so unforgivable, had nearly stolen a life right in front of them. As he pressed the back of his hand against his forehead, cold sweat smeared across his skin. He whispered under his breath, "What have we done?" The medics secured Daniel to a portable stretcher, their straps tight but careful, as if they were binding him to the world itself so he could not slip away again. The staff of Willow Grove Funeral Home stood back, their faces pale, their hands trembling, their eyes darting between the boy and the chamber that had almost been his grave. One of the younger attendants muttered, his voice so faint it was nearly lost under the sound of Velcro straps. "I saw him yesterday. I checked his vitals." There was nothing. His words dissolved into silence, and no one dared to respond. The stretcher rolled quickly to rough the hallway. Michael followed close, his shoes tapping against the tile, his hands hovering in the air as if unsure whether to hold onto the boy or collapse where he stood. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting the narrow corridor in alternating brightness and shadow. Every flash reminded him of Daniel's fists against the glass, of the muffled screams, of the sound that would never leave his mind. Outside, the night air was bitterly cold, and the ambulance lights painted the street in sharp strokes of red and blue. Neighbors had already gathered, drawn by the sirens and the shouting. Faces peered from doorways, whispers spread like wildfire, and cell phones rose into the air, recording shaky videos. The sight of a stretcher emerging from the funeral home at this hour would have been strange enough, but the detail that the body on it was moving, breathing, alive, that was something that would haunt the entire town by morning. The medics loaded Daniel into the ambulance, the hydraulic lift whining as it raised him into the glowing interior. Michael took one step toward the open doors. "I am coming," he said firmly, though no one had asked him. The medic at the door hesitated but then nodded quickly. "Fine, but stay out of our way. He's critical." Michael climbed in, the metal floor rattling under his shoes. The doors slammed shut, sealing the three of them inside with the fragile rhythm of Daniel's breathing and the beeping monitor that now tracked his pulse. As the ambulance lurched forward, Michael sat on the narrow bench against the wall, gripping the edge so tightly his hands ached. The city lights blurred past the windows, but he saw none of them. His eyes never left the boy. Daniel's small hand lay limp against the stretcher, pale but undeniably warm. Michael leaned forward slowly, whispering as though speaking too loudly might shatter the thread that held the boy to life. "Stay with us, Daniel. Please, stay with us." The medic adjusted the IV line, glancing at the numbers on the monitor with a crease of concern across his forehead. "He's unstable," he muttered to his partner. "Blood pressure's barely holding, oxygen saturation's low." His partner nodded, pressing down on the oxygen mask with firmer hands, murmuring words of encouragement no one was really hearing. Michael swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper. How is this possible? He was declared dead. Hours ago. They signed the death certificate. The medic's eyes flicked toward him, sharp but not unkind. Then someone made a mistake that almost burned this boy alive. His words cut through the siren's wail like a blade. Michael pressed his palms together, his head bowing low. His entire career, built on precision, respect, and the handling of grief, felt like it was crumbling in one night. If Daniel had been lost in that chamber, his blood would have been on all of their hands. And yet, even as guilt pressed against his chest, another feeling stirred deep inside. Awe. Against all odds, the boy had survived long enough to cry out, to pound on the glass, to summon life from the very edge of fire. The ambulance screeched to a halt in front of St. Mary's Medical Center. The back doors flung open, and the stretcher was pulled swiftly into the bright glare of the emergency bay. Doctors and nurses were already waiting, alerted by the frantic radio calls. Their questions fired like bullets as they moved. Age, vital signs, how long unconscious? The medics shouted back their answers, but the words blurred together in a chorus of urgency. Michael followed, his suit jacket flapping as he ran behind the stretcher, his heart hammering louder than the squeak of the gurney wheels. Inside the ER, the fluorescent lights were merciless, illuminating every pale inch of Daniel's face, every tremor of his chest. Nurses attached monitors, inserted IV lines, pressed stethoscopes to his skin. The beeps and alarms filled the air, a cold symphony of fragile life. Michael stood back at last, pressed against the wall, watching with wide eyes. He was an intruder in this world of medicine, but he could not look away. Not after what he had witnessed. The lead doctor, a woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice, leaned over Daniel. "Pulse is weak but present. Oxygen saturation is climbing. Prepare for intubation. Let's stabilize him now." Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had seen the worst and still believed in fighting back. Michael felt something break inside him at those words. Stabilize him, fight back. It meant there was hope. Hope that Daniel had not come back from the edge for nothing. Hours passed in a blur. Michael sat in the hard plastic chair of the waiting room, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped so tightly together they were turning white. Every few minutes, he would glance at the swinging doors that led back to the trauma unit, waiting for news, for any sign that the boy who had pounded on the glass had truly been saved. His mind replayed the sound of fists against steel, the muffled scream that had frozen the blood in his veins. He had never been a man of faith, not really, but tonight he whispered a prayer he barely understood. Please, please let him live. Finally, the doors opened. The doctor approached, her expression grave but not hopeless. Michael rose so quickly his chair skidded back against the floor. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Is he alive?" She nodded once. "He is alive, for now, but he is critical. Severe hypoxia, possible cardiac complications. We need to keep him in intensive care." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. "Were you family?" Michael shook his head slowly, his throat tight. "No, but I was there when he came back." The words felt heavy in his mouth, as though even speaking them aloud made the truth harder to bear. The doctor placed a hand gently on his arm. "Then you understand. This boy's survival is nothing short of a miracle, but miracles demand answers. Someone needs to explain how he was nearly cremated alive." Her words sank into him like cold water, and he knew she was right. Daniel was alive, but the shadow of what almost happened still lingered. And somewhere in that shadow lay the truth, a truth that would change everything. The hallway outside the intensive care unit smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Nurses hurried back and forth, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor, while machines beeped in sharp, steady rhythms that seemed to echo into eternity. Michael sat alone on the edge of a plastic chair, his eyes fixed on the glass window of the ICU. Beyond it, Daniel lay surrounded by wires and tubes, a small figure swallowed by technology. His chest rose and fell under the pressure of the ventilator, his fragile breaths measured and controlled by machines, but unmistakably real. For hours, Michael had not moved. His tie was loosened, his hair damp from the sweat of panic that had not yet faded. He felt as though his own body had been left behind somewhere in that furnace room, still frozen in the moment when fists hit the glass. No matter how hard he tried to breathe, the sound replayed in his head, louder than the monitors, louder than the sirens. He pressed his hands together, bowing his head, whispering words he had not spoken since childhood. "Please keep him alive. Please let him stay." A nurse approached quietly, a clipboard tucked under her arm. She studied him for a moment as if weighing whether to interrupt. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "He is stable for now. The doctors managed to restore his oxygen levels. His heart is beating on its own again." Michael lifted his head, his eyes red. "He is alive," he repeated, as though needing the words spoken again to believe them. She nodded. "Yes, but it will be a long night. You should rest." He shook his head almost violently. "I cannot leave him." The nurse gave him a small look of sympathy and walked on, her shoes fading into the hum of the hospital. Michael leaned back in the chair, his body aching from exhaustion, but his mind sharper than ever. Questions gnawed at him. How could this boy have been declared dead? Who had signed the certificate? How close had they come to burning him alive without even realizing the truth? He rubbed his hands over his face, but the answers did not come. All that remained was the image of Daniel's terrified eyes pressed against the furnace glass. As the night dragged on, the ICU grew quieter. The rush of footsteps slowed, the chatter of nurses faded to whispers, and only the beeping monitors kept time. Michael found himself rising from the chair, drawn toward the glass like a moth to flame. He pressed his palm against it, staring at the boy within. And then movement. Daniel's hand twitched under the blanket, a faint, almost invisible shift. Michael's breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer, his heart hammering, watching for another sign. Seconds ticked by like hours, and then it happened again. Daniel's fingers curled slightly, as though reaching for something unseen. Michael hurried to the nearest nurse. "He moved," he whispered urgently, almost afraid the words would vanish if spoken too loudly. His hand, he moved it. The nurse glanced at the monitor and then at the boy, her professional calm steady. It could be reflex, but it could also mean he is trying to wake. She stepped into the ICU, adjusting tubes, shining a small light into Daniel's eyes. Michael stood at the doorway, his hands trembling as he gripped the frame. The nurse lowered her light and looked back at him. His pupils responded, "That is good news." Relief swept through Michael so quickly his knees nearly buckled. He pressed his forehead against the doorframe, whispering again, "Thank you." But the relief was fragile. Beneath it lay the truth that had been waiting since the furnace. The boy had been left for dead by mistake. If he woke, he me. GHT know what had happened, and the weight of that knowledge could crush everyone involved. Hours later, the quiet was broken by the steady sound of the ventilator slowing. Michael rose from his chair, alert, his eyes wide. The machines adjusted their rhythm, and Daniel's chest began to rise and fall more on its own. A doctor hurried in, her face tense with focus. "He is breathing," she said quickly. "The ventilator is lowering support. He is trying on his own." Michael pressed closer to the glass, his hand flat against it, his heart in his throat. The boy's lips parted slightly, his eyelids fluttering, and for a brief second, the machines did not seem to matter. Life was returning. When the ventilator finally detached, the room was filled with a silence heavier than any sound. Daniel's chest rose and fell slowly, his breaths ragged but real. The doctor adjusted his oxygen mask, speaking calmly to the nurses. "He is stable enough to attempt consciousness. Keep a close eye on vitals. We need to see if he can respond." Michael could not stay back any longer. He asked permission, his voice breaking. "Please, may I see him, just for a moment?" The doctor studied him, then nodded. 1 minute. Michael entered the ICU with steps that felt heavier than stone. The smell of antiseptic burned his nostrils, but he hardly noticed. All he saw was Daniel, fragile, trembling, yet undeniably alive. He lowered himself into the chair beside the bed, his hands resting on the edge, careful not to disturb the wires. He leaned close, his voice a whisper meant only for the boy. "Daniel, you are safe now. You made it. Do you hear me?" The boy's eyelids fluttered again. His lips moved, forming faint, broken sounds. Michael's heart pounded so loudly he thought the monitors might pick it up. He leaned closer still. "It is all right. Take your time." The words came slowly, rasping through the mask, but they came. "Dark, so dark." His voice cracked, barely audible. Michael's eyes filled with tears. "You remember," he whispered. Daniel's chest rose shakily, and then his small hand shifted again, reaching weakly toward the air. Michael gently caught it, holding it carefully as if it were glass. "You are here now, with me. You are safe." Daniel's head turned slightly on the pillow, his eyes struggling to open. Through the haze of pain and confusion, his gaze found Michael S. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. And then, in a voice no stronger than a sigh, the boy spoke again. "They left me in the fire." Michael froze, his hand tightening around the boy S. The words pierced him like a blade. The truth was out, spoken by the one who had lived it. The mistake, the horror, the unforgivable error, they were no longer secrets. They were alive in the trembling voice of the boy who had fought his way back from death itself. Michael swallowed hard, his throat burning. "It was not your time," he said softly, though he knew the words were not enough. "You fought, you survived. And I swear to you, Daniel, I will not let anyone put you back there again." The boy's lips trembled faintly under the mask, his eyes closing once more, exhausted by even that small effort. But Michael knew he had heard. As the monitors continued their steady beeping, Michael sat back in the chair, his hand still wrapped around the boy's. The weight of what had happened pressed harder than ever, but within it, one thing burned brighter than fear: a promise. Daniel had been given back to the world, and Michael would not allow that miracle to be wasted. The morning light filtered weakly through the hospital blinds, casting long gray bars across the sterile floor. The night's chaos had faded into an eerie calm, but Michael had not slept. He sat hunched forward in the waiting room chair, elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on the double doors that led to Daniel's room. His body ached with exhaustion, but his mind refused to quiet. He could still hear the boy's rasping words, echoing like a ghost. "They left me in the fire." Every time the phrase repeated in his head, Michael's chest tightened. Those words did not just confirm the unimaginable mistake, they gave it a voice, a witness. And though Daniel was alive, the shadow of what nearly happened stretched far beyond the walls of that ICU. The doors hissed open, and Dr. Karen Mitchell, the lead physician who had taken charge the night before, walked briskly into the hallway. She carried herself with the authority of someone used to pressure, but her expression carried weight. Michael rose immediately, his suit jacket rumpled, his tie hanging loose. "How is he?" he asked, his voice rough from sleeplessness. Dr. Mitchell slowed, studying him for a moment before answering. "He made it through the night. His oxygen levels are holding. He's weak, but he is responding." Relief washed over Michael like a tide, but it was fleeting, her eyes sharpened. "Mr. Reeves, I need to ask you something. What exactly happened?" "At the funeral home." Michael's stomach twisted. He knew this moment would come. He swallowed, his voice low but steady. "We were minutes away from igniting the chamber. The paperwork had been signed. He was declared deceased. Then we heard it banging on the glass, screaming. He was alive." The doctor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Declared deceased by whom?" Michael shook his head. I do not know. The body came from county medical. The certificate was in order. I have seen thousands of them. There was nothing unusual on the paperwork. His voice faltered. Until last night. Dr. Mitchell crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. We cannot keep this contained, Mr. Reeves. A child nearly burned alive because of a misdiagnosis. That is more than a mistake, it is negligence, or worse. The words sliced through him. He had known it, but hearing them aloud made it real. He rubbed a hand over his face. What happens now? Now, she said firmly, the police are going to get involved. Almost on cue, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. 2 uniformed officers entered, followed by a man in a dark suit with the kind of expression that suggested he had seen too many late-night calls like this one. Detective Samuel Grant introduced himself with a quick flash of his badge. His voice was calm, but it carried steel. We have some questions, and I suspect you, Mr. Reeves, are the person who can start giving us answers. They moved into a small conference room off the waiting area. The blinds were drawn, and the hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. Michael sat across from the detective, his palms sweating despite the chill in the room. Detective Grant leaned forward, his hands folded on the table. Walk me through everything from the moment the body arrived at your funeral home. Michael recounted the night in painstaking detail, the arrival of the body, the sealed paperwork, the chamber warming, the sudden pounding on the glass. His voice cracked when he described the boy's face pressed against the window, his fists bruised from beating the steel. We opened it just in time, he whispered. Seconds later, and he would have been gone. The detective scribbled notes, his brow furrowed. When Michael finished, silence hung heavy. Finally, Grant asked, You say the certificate came from county medical. Did you recognize the attending physician? Michael shook his head. No, it was a name I did not know. Dr. Wallace, I think. It seemed routine, but something was not right. Looking back, the paperwork felt rushed, sparse details. Grant exchanged a look with one of the officers. We will be pulling every file connected to that certificate. If this was negligence, someone will answer for it. If it was intentional, his voice trailed off, leaving the implication to hang in the air like smoke. Michael's pulse quickened. Intentional? You think someone meant for this? Grant's eyes narrowed. Right now, I do not know, but what I do know is that a child was nearly cremated alive and someone signed off on it. We are not treating this as a simple error. Michael's thoughts raced. He wanted to believe it was a mistake, some terrible oversight, but Daniel's broken words gnawed at him. They left me in the fire. It was not just about being declared dead, it was about being abandoned. The door opened, and Dr. Mitchell entered quietly. Detective, I thought you should hear this. The boy spoke again. Michael bolted upright. What did he say? She hesitated. It was fragmented, but clear enough. He repeated that he was in the dark, that he could hear people outside, but they did not help him. He said someone told him to be still, not to fight. Her voice dropped. It sounded like he remembered being declared gone. The detective rose to his feet, his jaw set. I want every record from county medical pulled tonight. I want the ambulance report, the ER intake, everything. If someone told that boy to stay still, then someone knew he was alive. Michael's heart pounded in his ears. The weight of what had happened deepened with every word. It was no longer just about a mistake. It was about trust, betrayal, and a boy's voice that refused to be silenced. Hours later, Michael stood again at Daniel's bedside. The boy's eyes were closed, his breath slow but steady. Machines surrounded him, but it was the small hand resting atop the blanket that held Michael's focus. He remembered that same hand pounding desperately against the furnace glass. He reached out carefully, placing his palm over it. The warmth was there, fragile but undeniable. He leaned close, speaking softly. You are safe now, Daniel, but I promise you this, I will not stop until I know why they tried to take that away from you. The boy stirred faintly, his lips parting beneath the oxygen mask. Though no words came, Michael thought he saw the faintest nod, as if somewhere deep inside, Daniel understood. Outside the room, Detective G. Rant spoke quietly to Dr. Mitchell, his voice low but firm. We are opening an investigation tonight. If there is a chain of negligence, we will find it. But if someone wanted this boy gone, he paused, his eyes dark. Then we are dealing with something far worse. Michael stood by the bed, unaware of the hushed conversation in the hall. He focused only on the fragile rise and fall of Daniel's chest, knowing that the mystery surrounding this boy was only just beginning. And in the silence of that sterile room, one thought would not leave him. Sometimes death does not come naturally. Sometimes it is delivered. The morning sun had fully risen by the time Daniel stirred again. The faint light seeped through the slats of the blinds, stretching pale lines across the hospital room. Machines hummed in steady rhythms, their green numbers rising and falling, a fragile symphony of life. Michael had not moved from his post by the bed, his body stiff and weary, but anchored by something stronger than exhaustion. He was waiting for the boy's voice, for the truth, for a sign that the horror of the furnace was not the end, but the beginning of something larger. Daniel's eyelids fluttered open, his gaze unfocused at first. His lips parted beneath the oxygen mask, pulling in shaky breaths. Michael leaned forward quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Daniel," he whispered, careful not to startle him. "It is all right. You are safe here." The boy blinked slowly, his eyes searching until they found Michael S. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the steady hiss of oxygen. Then, in a voice as thin as paper, Daniel whispered, "It was cold." His words rasped through the mask, fragile but undeniable. Michael squeezed his hand gently. "You remember." Daniel nodded weakly, his small fingers curling tighter around Michael's. His eyes filled with something raw, something too heavy for a child to carry. "They put me in the dark. I tried to shout. I tried to move. But they said, 'Do not fight.'" His voice cracked, his throat struggling. Michael's chest tightened. "Who said that, Daniel? Do you remember a face, a name?" The boy's lips trembled, his eyes darting toward the door as though afraid someone might be listening. "A man. I do not know his name. He wore white. He touched my arm. He said it would be over soon." A tear slipped from the corner of his eye. "I thought he meant the fire." Michael's hand tightened protectively over the boy's. He swallowed hard, fighting the anger rising in his throat. "You are here now. That man cannot hurt you anymore, but you must tell us everything you can remember." Before Daniel could respond, the door opened quietly. Detective Grant stepped inside, his notepad in hand, his expression softened but intent. He nodded respectfully toward the boy. "Daniel, my name is Samuel Grant. I am here to help you. I will not let anyone hurt you again." Daniel shrank slightly against the pillow, his eyes wide. Michael leaned close. "It is all right. You can trust him." The detective pulled a chair closer, lowering himself so his eyes were level with the boy S. His voice was steady, not harsh, but firm enough to carry weight. "You said someone told you not to fight. Can you tell me what he looked like?" Daniel's eyes unfocused for a moment, as though searching through fog. Tall, dark hair, his hands were cold, he smelled like medicine. He shivered, his small body trembling. He pressed something on my arm, then everything went quiet. Grant exchanged a look with Michael, his jaw tightening. He scribbled quickly in his notebook. "A sedative," he muttered under his breath. "He was drugged." Michael felt his stomach drop. "They wanted him still," he whispered, "so no one would notice." The detective rose slowly, his expression grim. This was not an error. Someone intended for this child to be declared dead, and they nearly succeeded. His voice hardened, the weight of his words filling the room. "This is attempted murder." Daniel whimpered softly, his fingers gripping Michael's hand as though it were the only solid thing left in the world. Michael bent close, whispering, "You are brave, Daniel. You are stronger than anyone knows." The boy's lips moved again, his voice barely audible. "Why me?" Michael closed his eyes, unable to answer. He smoothed the blanket over Daniel's chest, his voice breaking. "We will find out, I promise." Later that day, the hospital hallways buzzed with whispers. News had spread faster than anyone could contain it. Reporters were already gathering outside, their cameras waiting for confirmation of the unbelievable story. A child declared dead, nearly cremated, rescued seconds before the fire. Michael stood near the window, staring down at the crowd forming below. Their voices rose in fragments: miracle boy, medical scandal, cover up, and each word twisted tighter in his chest. Detective Grant joined him, his tone low. "This is going public. See whether we want it to or not. You know that, right?" Michael nodded slowly. "The world deserves to know, but what about Daniel? He has been through enough. He does not need cameras shoved in his face." Grant sighed, sliding his notebook into his coat. I agree, but once the press gets hold of this, keeping his identity protected will be nearly impossible. We will do what we can. Michael turned to him sharply. He is just a boy. Protecting him is not optional, it is everything. The detective studied him for a long moment before nodding. You care for him like he is your own. Michael looked back through the glass, watching Daniel sleep beneath the tangle of wires and monitors. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside. He fought his way back from death with nothing but his fists and his will. Someone tried to erase him, and he survived anyway. I will not let the world take him apart now. That evening, Daniel woke again, his breath stronger, his eyes clearer. He turned his head toward Michael, his voice trembling but more certain than before. You were there. You pulled me out. Michael leaned closer, nodding. Yes, and I would do it again 1,000 times. Daniel's lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. I thought no one could hear me. I thought I was gone. Michael's throat tightened. I heard you, Daniel, and I will keep hearing you, always. For a brief moment, the boy's fragile smile held, and in that moment, Michael felt something shift inside himself. The horror of the furnace, the guilt of the near tragedy, all of it narrowed into a single vow. He had been given a second chance, not for himself, but for the boy who now lay before him, and he would not waste it. But as Daniel's eyes closed again, drifting back into uneasy sleep, Michael knew the danger was far from over. Somewhere out there was a man in a white coat with cold hands and a syringe, a man who had looked into a child's eyes and decided he did not deserve to live. And until that man was found, Daniel's fight for survival was not finished. Detective Grant's office was buried under a mountain of files by the next morning. Stacks of manila folders crowded his desk, his laptop hummed with half-loaded spreadsheets, and the fluorescent light above flickered in a way that gnawed at his patience. He had ordered every record tied to Daniel's supposed death: the ambulance run sheet, the ER intake notes, the physician's report, the official death certificate. What he held in his hands now was not just paperwork. It was a puzzle, and every piece seemed cut to fit the wrong picture. The death certificate bore the signature of a Dr. Richard Wallace, a name that rang hollow even to him. Grant had spent 2 decades dealing with medical examiners, coroners, and ER physicians. He could not recall Wallace once, yet here it was, his name scribbled at the bottom of a form that had almost condemned a child to fire. Grant flipped the page, his jaw tightening. The time of death was recorded at 2:13 a.m. The body was transferred at 3:02. Barely 50 minutes later, Daniel was at Willow Grove Funeral Home. The timeline was too fast, too clean, almost as if it had been arranged ahead of time. Grant leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His phone buzzed across the desk. It was Dr. Karen Mitchell. He answered quickly. Talk to me. Her voice carried that clipped precision he had come to respect. I dug into our own system. There's no record of Wallace in county's staff directory. No license on file. Whoever signed that certificate does not exist here. Grant's stomach dropped. A ghost doctor, he muttered. Someone inserted into the system just long enough to sign away a life. Yes, Mitchell said grimly. And if Daniel had not woken up when he did, no one would have questioned it. Grant pinched the bridge of his nose, anger burning in his chest. Then we are not looking at negligence. We are looking at an operation. Meanwhile, Michael remained at Daniel's bedside, a silent guardian through the rising storm. The hospital was no longer calm. Reporters pressed against the glass doors of the lobby, their voices rising like a swarm, microphones stretched forward, cameras flashing whenever someone in scrubs walked by. The words on their lips spread like wildfire through the crowd. Miracle Boy, cremation scandal, child survivor. Hospital security tried to hold them back, but the noise still reached the upper floors. Daniel stirred in his sleep, his small body tensing at the sound. Michael leaned close, whispering, "Do not listen to them. You are safe here." But even as he said it, he knew safety was slipping further away. That afternoon, Detective Grant arrived at the hospital. His face carried the weight of what he had learned, but his eyes sharpened when he saw Daniel awake, blinking weakly under the oxygen mask. He pulled Michael aside into the hallway, his voice low. "The doctor who signed that certificate. E does not exist. Whoever put that name down was covering tracks." Michael felt the floor tilt beneath him. Then someone wanted him gone. They made sure no one would question it. Grant nodded grimly. Exactly, and I need to know why. No one goes to this much trouble for no reason. There is something about that boy, something someone wanted buried. Michael's gaze drifted through the window, back to Daniel's fragile form on the bed. He is just a child, he whispered. What could he possibly have that someone would kill for? The detective's jaw tightened. That is what we are going to find out. Later, as evening fell and the hospital lights glowed harsh against the dark sky, Daniel woke again. His eyes opened wider this time, his breathing steadier. Michael moved to his side, relieved. You are stronger today, he said gently. Daniel's gaze shifted between Michael and the ceiling above, his expression clouded. Why did they say I was gone? I was shouting. I could feel the cold. I could hear them. Why did no one help me? His voice trembled, but his words carried the pain of betrayal deeper than his small body should have known. Michael swallowed hard. Because they were wrong, Daniel, or they wanted to believe you were gone, but you fought. That is why you are here. Daniel's lips quivered. The man in white, he looked at me. I knew he saw me. He knew I was still here, but he closed my eyes himself. And then it went dark. Michael's heart clenched. He held the boy's hand tightly, grounding him. That man will not find you again. You have my word. At that moment, Detective Grant stepped forward, crouching so he was at Daniel's level. His voice was steady but gentle. Daniel, you are very brave for telling us this. Every detail you remember helps us stop him. Can you tell me if there was anything else? A sound? A smell? The boy hesitated, his brow furrowing. There was a ring. Grant's eyes sharpened. A ring. Daniel nodded faintly. On his hand, silver, with a red stone in the middle. I remember because it was shining under the light when he touched me. Michael exchanged a glance with the detective, both men struck by the significance. A detail like that was not imagined. It was a mark, a signature. Grant rose slowly, his mind already racing. That ring could identify him. If this man has a pattern, if he has done this before, he did not finish the thought, but the implication chilled the room. That night, Michael sat again by the boy's bedside as the storm outside grew louder. The reporters had not left. If anything, their numbers had doubled. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their searchlights cutting across the hospital windows. Michael pulled the blanket higher over Daniel's chest, shielding him as best he could. Do not look out there, he whispered. They do not matter, only you matter. But in his heart, Michael knew the world outside was hungry. Hungry for answers, for scandal, for spectacle. And at the center of it all was a boy who had nearly been turned to ash, a boy who carried in his memory the face of a man with cold hands and a silver ring. As midnight approached, Detective Grant stood in his office again, staring at the files sprawled across his desk. He picked up a photograph taken years ago during another case. A different boy, a different name, but the same chilling note. Declared dead, no record of attending physician, body transferred too quickly. The pattern was no longer invisible. It had been waiting, buried in the cracks of bureaucracy, and now it had surfaced with fists pounding against glass. Grant's hand curled into a fist. This was not just Daniel's story. It was part of something bigger, darker, and it had been hiding in plain sight for years. And somewhere out there, a man with a silver ring knew that one of his victims had slipped through his fingers. By the next morning, the hospital had transformed into something closer to a fortress than a place of healing. Security guards patrolled the hallways in pairs, their radios crackling with static. The entrance had been barricaded with temporary fencing to hold back the growing swarm of reporters and curious onlookers. Flashbulbs exploded outside every time a staff member stepped through the doors. Whispers of the boy who came back from the dead spread across every waiting room like wildfire. Inside the ICU, Michael sat rigid in the chair at Daniel's bedside. He had barely slept, every sound in the hallway setting his nerves on edge. His hand remained close to Daniel's, as though physical contact could anchor the boy to the world. Daniel stirred occasionally, his fragile body fighting to stay awake, but exhaustion pulled him under again and again. Each time his eyelids fluttered shut, Michael's heart sank with fear that he might not wake again. Detective Grant arrived shortly after sunrise. He carried a manila envelope tucked under his arm and the heavy look of a man who had spent the night chasing shadow. As he motioned Michael out into the hallway, lowering his voice, I pulled records. Daniel's case isn't isolated. There are others. Michael's eyes narrowed. Others. Grant nodded grimly. 3 children in the past 5 years, all declared dead under questionable circumstances, all with paperwork signed by doctors who do not exist in the registry, and all transferred to funeral homes faster than protocol allows. He tapped the envelope. Every case shows the same signature anomaly, a red-stamped approval from county medical with no attending physician attached. It's a loophole, and someone has been using it. Michael felt a chill crawl down his spine. How many were buried? Cremated. Grant's eyes darkened. All 3. No one questioned it because no one lived to tell the difference. Daniel is the first. Michael's stomach twisted violently. He pressed a hand against the wall for balance, his knees weak. So he is not just a mistake, he is a survivor. Grant's jaw tightened. Exactly, which means whoever orchestrated this is aware he slipped through, and if they know, he let the words hang, but the meaning was clear. Daniel was a target. Back in the room, Daniel stirred, opening his eyes slowly. His breathing was still shallow, but stronger than before. He turned his head toward Michael, his voice faint. Are they gone? Michael smoothed the blanket over him. The men who hurt you, they are not here, they cannot reach you. Daniel's small brow furrowed. I hear them at night. Michael glanced toward the window, unsettled. What do you mean? Daniel's lips trembled. I hear footsteps by the door, and then they go away. Michael froze. He had chalked up the sounds in the hallway to restless nurses and security patrols. But the way Daniel's eyes widened with fear told him this was not imagination. Someone had been outside. That evening, Grant positioned plainclothes officers throughout the ward. Their presence was discreet, but their eyes tracked every shadow. Michael remained at Daniel's side, his exhaustion replaced by a low, simmering alertness. He refused to leave, not even for food. As the night deepened, the storm outside grew louder. Reporters still shouted questions through megaphones. Helicopters hovered above like vultures. And then, just past midnight, Michael noticed movement at the far end of the hallway. A figure lingered in the shadows, too still to be a nurse, too patient to be a visitor. The man wore a hood pulled low over his face, his hands buried in his pockets. Michael's chest tightened. He rose silently from the chair, stepping to the doorway. The figure noticed and slipped further back into the shadows. Michael whispered hoarsely, Grant. The detective appeared almost instantly, his hand resting on his hip where his holster sat concealed beneath his jacket. He followed Michael's gaze. But by the time Grant looked, the figure was gone, the hallway empty. Grant cursed under his breath. He is watching. Michael's pulse hammered. Was it him, the man with the ring? Grant's jaw clenched. I do not know, but he knows the boy is alive, and he is bold enough to come here. The next morning, Grant gathered the staff in a small conference room. His tone was sharp, each word measured. From this point forward, Daniel Reeves is a protected patient. No one enters his room without clearance. Every visitor is logged. Every hallway is watched. His gaze swept across the nurses, administrators, and security officers. Someone wants that child gone, and they will not stop. Do not give them an opening. Michael sat at the back, his fists clenched. The boy's life had nearly been stolen once, and now the predators were circling again. He thought of Daniel's frail hand pounding against furnace glass, his muffled cries for help. The sound was carved into his soul. He vowed silently that if anyone tried again, they would have to go through him first. Later that afternoon, Daniel spoke again, his voice a shaky whisper. I saw his hand, he murmured, his eyelids heavy. When he leaned over me, the ring was cold against my skin. Michael leaned closer. Do you remember anything else? His voice, his words. Daniel's eyes watered. He said it would be easier if I stopped moving, that no one would notice, that the fire would take me. Michael felt bile rise in his throat. He could barely breathe past the rage pressing inside him. You will never see that man again, he whispered fiercely. I promise. Detective Grant entered moments later, listening intently as Michael relayed the boy's words. Grant's eyes narrowed. Cold hands, red ring, a man who speaks like death is a convenience. He snapped his notebook shut. This is ritualistic. Whoever this is, he has done it before, and he believes he is untouchable. That night, as Michael sat beside the boy, the hallway outside quieted. For a brief moment, the storm of noise and fear seemed to ease. Daniel's small hand rested in his, warm. And steady, Michael whispered, "You are not alone anymore. Not now, not ever." But deep down, he knew the fight was only beginning. Somewhere beyond those hospital walls, a man with a red ring had realized his mistake, and men like that did not leave loose ends. Detective Grant had spent the better part of the next day locked in the records office at County Medical. Dusty files, outdated computer systems, and reluctant clerks made the search crawl like molasses, but persistence was his trade. Finally, buried in a drawer mislabeled archived coroner transfers, he found what he had been chasing: a scanned authorization form dated 2 years earlier. The attending physician's name was different, Dr. Harold Yates, but the handwriting was the same as the signature on Daniel's death certificate. Even more chilling was the detail scribbled in the margin: approved, expedite transfer. The instruction had been stamped with the same red insignia. Grant sat back, exhaling slowly. This was no isolated incident. The same hand, under different names, had been signing away children's lives for years. His phone buzzed against the desk, dragging him back into the present. It was Michael. The man's voice trembled through the receiver. He had another nightmare. He woke up screaming about fire, said the man was standing over him again. Grant rubbed his temple, staring at the damning paperwork in front of him. "Stay with him. I am coming back now. We may have our first real lead." At the hospital, Daniel clung to Michael's sleeve, his body shaking with residual fear. The boy's wide eyes darted toward the corners of the room as if expecting shadows to take shape. Michael stroked his hair gently, murmuring, "It is not real, Daniel. You are safe. He cannot touch you here." But even as the words left his mouth, Michael noticed something that made his stomach lurch. On the small table near the bed, where Daniel's water cup usually sat, a folded piece of paper lay tucked under the rim of the tray. Michael's hand trembled as he picked it up. The paper was small, no larger than a receipt, and on it were 3 words scrawled in jagged handwriting: "He is mine." Michael froze, his breath hitched in his throat. He turned toward the door, his voice low but urgent. "Grant, get in here." The detective appeared seconds later. Michael handed him the note with shaking hands. Grant's eyes narrowed as he studied the words. He scanned the hallway, then barked into his radio. "Lock this floor down. Now, no one in or out until I clear it." Security scrambled. Nurses pulled curtains shut, staff hurried patients into secure rooms, and officers checked every doorway. But whoever had left the note was already gone. Grant cursed under his breath. He was here, inside the ward, watching. Daniel whimpered, his voice trembling. He said those words before, when I could not move. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He said I belonged to the fire. Michael gathered the boy into his arms as gently as the wires and monitors allowed. His own fear burned into something sharper rage. "Over my dead body," he whispered. That night, while the hospital buzzed with lockdown procedures, Grant drove across town to a small apartment belonging to a retired nurse he had tracked down from the archived case. Her name was Alina Price, and she had worked the night shift in County Medical's transfer department 5 years ago. She opened the door cautiously, her frail body framed in the dim glow of a single lamp. "You are here about the red stamp," she said softly before he even asked. Grant blinked. "You know about it." Her hands trembled as she motioned him inside. The apartment smelled faintly of mothballs and old paper. She shuffled toward a worn recliner and lowered herself carefully. "I signed off on 2 of those transfers myself. Children, both declared gone, but something about it never felt right. The paperwork bypassed protocol. No autopsy, no attending confirmation, just a stamp and a demand to expedite." Grant leaned forward. "Did you ever see who gave the orders?" Her eyes clouded with fear. "Once. A man in a white coat. He was not staff. I knew everyone in that hospital, but not him. He had a silver ring on his finger. Red stone. I never forgot it." Her voice dropped. "When I asked questions, I was reassigned. Then I was told to retire early." Grant's blood ran cold. The ring again, always the ring, he pressed gently. "Do you remember his name?" She shook her head. "No, but the way people spoke around him, they feared him. He was not a doctor. He was something else." Grant thanked her, though the words felt thin against the gravity of her confession. As he stepped out into the night, the weight of the storm pressed down heavier. Whoever this man was, he had influence enough to erase his tracks, intimidate staff, and build a trail of invisible deaths. Back at the hospital, Michael refused to leave Daniel's side even for a moment. Every sound in T. He hallway made his body tense. When the boy finally drifted to sleep, Michael sat in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, staring at the folded note on the table. "He is mine." The words seared into his thoughts. Whoever had written them had been close enough to touch Daniel, close enough to finish what they started. As the clock crept past 2 a.m., Michael heard it again, the faintest sound outside the room. Not footsteps this time, but a soft scrape like metal brushing against glass. His pulse thundered in his ears. He rose silently, inching toward the window. For a split second, just beyond the reflection of the blinds, he saw it, a hand, pale against the dark, resting flat on the glass. On its finger gleamed a ring with a blood-red stone. Michael's breath caught. He lunged forward, slamming the blinds shut, but when he yanked them open again, the window was empty. The figure had vanished into the night. He stumbled back toward the bed, his heart racing. Daniel stirred at the commotion, his eyes fluttering open. "What is it?" the boy whispered, his voice drowsy. Michael forced calm into his voice, though his hands shook. "Nothing you need to fear. Go back to sleep." But he knew what he had seen. The man was not just watching from afar anymore. He was here, close, testing the boundaries. And for the first time, Michael realized the truth that clawed at his insides. This battle was not going to stay contained within hospital walls. The man with the red ring was patient, deliberate, and he would not stop. He had already claimed others, and in his mind, Daniel was already his. Michael sat back down, gripping the boy's hand, his gaze fixed on the door. If the ring-bearer wanted Daniel, he would have to walk through fire to take him. The hospital's night staff tried to resume their rhythm after the lockdown, but the atmosphere never fully recovered. Every creak of a cart, every flicker of fluorescent light, every hurried footstep carried a weight of unease. The nurses whispered among themselves about intruders, about the cameras that suddenly failed for a few minutes the night before, about the mysterious figure no one had managed to catch on tape. Michael had not slept in days, yet adrenaline kept him upright. He sat vigil at Daniel's bedside, his eyes scanning the shadows like a guard on the wall of a besieged city. His grip tightened around the boy's small hand each time he stirred, as though he could tether Daniel to life through sheer force of will. Around 3 in the morning, the hum of machines and the distant drone of helicopters outside lulled the hospital into a fragile quiet. Michael felt his eyelids grow heavy for the first time in hours. Just as he started to drift, a sound ripped through the silence, a faint metallic click, unmistakably the turning of a door handle. Michael shot upright, his pulse hammering. The ICU hallway was supposed to be locked down, guarded by 2 officers at either end. Slowly, cautiously, the door began to ease open, a thin sliver of darkness widening against the fluorescent light. "Who is there?" Michael barked, his voice rough but loud enough to carry. The door froze mid-motion. A pause hung heavy in the air, then the door eased closed again with a soft click. Michael rushed forward, yanking it open, but the hallway was empty. Only the distant hum of vending machines and the faint reflection of overhead lights greeted him. He pressed his back against the door, chest heaving. Either the intruder had slipped away in seconds, or he had never intended to come all the way in, just to test, to rattle. Michael turned back toward Daniel, his heart aching with fear. The boy had woken during the commotion, his eyes wide. "It is him, is it not?" he whispered. Michael forced steadiness into his voice. "Not while I am here." The next morning, Grant stormed into the hospital, flanked by 2 detectives. His jaw was tight, his voice clipped. "Security footage from last night is corrupted. 3-minute blackout. Exactly the window when your door was opened." Michael's stomach dropped, so he was here. Grant nodded grimly. "And he knows how to slip past cameras. That is not a mistake, that is experience." Daniel stirred in his bed, his face pale but his eyes sharp with fear. "I felt him," he murmured. The air got cold. His small body shivered. "He is not going to stop." Grant crouched beside the bed, his voice steady. "Daniel, listen to me. You are the first person to survive him. That makes you very brave, but it also means he is desperate. He will come again. But this time, we will be ready." That afternoon, the hospital administrators reluctantly agreed to transfer Daniel to a more secure wing. Reporters were told it was routine, though their cameras caught every second of the gurney's slow roll down the hallway. Michael walked beside him, never letting go of the boy's hand. Behind them, 2 armed officers flanked the route, eyes scanning for the slightest disturbance. Yet even in the new wing, the sense of danger did not lift. The staff avoided eye contact, whispers of red ring circulating like a curse. Nurses double-checked badge swipes, and visitors were turned away with curt refusals. But Michael knew the truth. Walls and guards might buy time, but they would not stop a man who had already infiltrated the system itself. That night, the storm broke. Rain battered the hospital windows, and thunder cracked across the sky. Michael sat in the dim light of Daniel's room, the rhythmic beeping of monitors the only constant. He tried to steady his breathing, but his nerves were frayed raw. Then, faintly, beneath the howl of the storm, came a sound that did not belong. A scrape. A slow, deliberate slide of metal against metal, like a lock being tested. Michael's blood ran cold. He rose silently, moving toward the door, his body tense. Another scrape. Then a click, the lock gave. The door swung open just enough to reveal a hand. A pale hand, fingers long and steady. On it gleamed a silver ring, its red stone catching the dim light. For a heartbeat, Michael froze, his body caught between terror and rage. Then instinct took over. He slammed the door with all his weight, the impact jarring through his shoulder. A muffled thud echoed as the figure on the other side struck back, trying to force it open. Michael braced himself, shouting hoarsely, "Grant, now." The boy whimpered, curling beneath the blankets as the struggle raged. The man on the other side pressed harder, the door groaning under the strain. Michael could feel the power in his grip, calculated and cold. Footsteps thundered down the hallway, and then Grant's voice roared, "Police, step back." The pressure on the door vanished instantly. By the time the officers flung it open, the hallway was empty once again. Only wet footprints trailed down the corridor, fading into the shadows. Michael collapsed against the doorframe, his chest heaving. Daniel's terrified eyes peeked from beneath the blankets. Michael rushed back to him, gathering him close despite the wires and tubes. "I told you," he whispered fiercely. "He will not take you, not while I breathe." Grant stood in the doorway, fury carved across his face. "He is escalating. That was not a message. That was an attempt." Michael's voice was raw. "The next time, he will succeed unless we stop him." The detective nodded grimly. "And we will. I am done chasing shadows. We are putting his face on record tonight." He turned sharply to his officers. "Pull every report of unauthorized entries in county medical over the past decade, every nurse or doctor who noticed something off, and get me a list of rings, signet style, silver with red stone, jewelers, antique dealers, private clubs. Someone knows this man. Someone sold him that ring." As the storm raged outside, Michael sat back beside the boy, gripping his hand so tightly it was as though he could fuse their strength together. He whispered again and again, "You are safe. You are safe." But deep inside, he knew the truth. Safety was an illusion, fragile as glass. And somewhere, watching through the rain, a man with a red ring seethed at his failure. He had been close, so close, and the next time he would not miss. Detective Grant had not slept. His desk looked like a war zone of scattered files, coffee-stained notepads, and photographs tacked haphazardly to the wall. Strings of red twine connected dates, names, and case numbers across the board like arteries of a body he was dissecting. At the center of it all was a hand-drawn sketch of a ring, silver, with a blood-red stone, and beneath it, 3 words scrawled in black ink, "He is mine." He had assigned 3 officers to comb through jewelers' databases overnight. At sunrise, a breakthrough arrived. The ring was not common. It was not even modern. It was a century-old design, linked to a defunct fraternal society known as the Order of the Ecliptic Flame. Once a private club for wealthy men in the early 1900s, the order had dissolved decades ago, or so the records claimed. But the jeweler's log revealed something chilling. 2 identical rings had been refurbished just last year by a private buyer. The name had been scrubbed from the order form, but the address connected to the purchase belonged to a medical supply company. Grant's pulse quickened. Someone was still using the order's symbol. someone with money, access, and the ability to slip unseen through the cracks of institutions meant to protect life. He shoved the file into his briefcase and drove straight to the hospital, the early morning traffic blurring past as his thoughts raced. If the man with the red ring was part of something larger, an organization with roots buried deep, then Daniel's survival was more dangerous than ever. Inside Daniel's room, Michael sat slumped in the chair, his face pale with fatigue but his eyes sharp. He had not left the boy's side, not even when urged to rest. When Grant E. entered, Michael straightened, his voice edged with urgency. "You found something." Grant closed the door firmly before speaking. "The ring is not random. It belongs to an old society, the Order of the Ecliptic Flame. Most people think it is long gone, but someone is still wearing their mark." Michael frowned. "A society, like a secret group?" Grant nodded grimly. "Secret enough that even the police do not have much on them. Their members were doctors, lawyers, businessmen, men who believed death was a passage they controlled." He let the words sink in. If this man is tied to them, Daniel is not just a target. He is a defiance of their order. Daniel stirred at the sound of their voices, his eyelids fluttering open. "Order," he murmured weakly. Michael leaned close, brushing the boy's hair from his forehead. "Nothing you need to worry about, you just rest." But Daniel shook his head faintly. "I heard him say it before it went dark. He said the flame never fails." His voice cracked. "What does that mean?" Michael and Grant exchanged a look that chilled them both. Later that day, hospital administrators called an emergency meeting. The boardroom was filled with tension, administrators in suits shifting uncomfortably as Detective Grant laid out the evidence of intrusion. Someone entered a locked ICU. Security footage was erased. A child's life was nearly taken under your roof. Tell me, how many of your staff are compromised? His voice was a blade, cutting through their murmurs. One administrator, a gray-haired man with sharp glasses, bristled. "Detective, you are accusing our hospital of harboring a conspiracy. That is outrageous." Grant slammed the photograph of the ring onto the table. "Outrageous? A man with this ring walked through your halls last night. He left a note on a child's bedside table. Do you want me to wait until he succeeds?" The room fell silent. The gray-haired man adjusted his glasses, his voice cooler. "We will cooperate, but I suggest you consider the optics of this. If you spread panic about secret societies, you will have more chaos than you can contain." Grant leaned across the table, his eyes burning. "What I want is the boy alive. Optics can rot." Meanwhile, back in Daniel's room, Michael grew more uneasy. He had noticed small inconsistencies all morning. A nurse he did not recognize had entered briefly, claiming to check vitals, but when pressed for her name, she had hurried away. An orderly had pushed a supply cart down the hallway, but when Michael glanced again, the cart was gone without a trace. He began to suspect what he dreaded most. The hospital itself was compromised. If the man with the ring had followers, they could be anywhere. Behind a clipboard, beneath a mask, inside the very system sworn to protect. That evening, Daniel grew restless, whispering half-formed fears as he dozed. "He is coming back. I hear him. Fire, fire." His hands twitched against the blanket, as though pounding against glass all over again. Michael bent close, his heart breaking. "You are safe. I will not let the fire take you." But his own eyes kept darting to the door, to the shadows under it, waiting for them to shift. Detective Grant returned with an update just as thunder cracked across the horizon, rattling the windows. He motioned Michael into the hallway, his tone urgent. "The order may not be as defunct as people think. I spoke to a contact at the FBI. They have whispers of activity linked to them. Organ harvesting, ritualistic deaths. And guess where those whispers originate? County Medical." Michael's face drained of color. "So the hospital is part of it." Grant nodded slowly. "At least pieces of it, enough that no place is safe for him here." Michael's voice sharpened. "Then we move him, now, before they try again." Grant hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I agree, but once we move him, the press will explode, and the men after him will know we are scared. We need a plan." Michael's voice shook, but his conviction did not. "I do not care about optics. I care about that boy breathing tomorrow morning." Inside the room, Daniel stirred again, his voice thin but insistent. "He said the fire is not the end. He said it is the beginning." His words sent a chill through the air. "I do not want the fire." Michael gathered him close, whispering fiercely, "You will never see it again, I swear it." But deep in his chest, he felt the truth pressing in. The fire was not gone. It was waiting, and the man with the red ring was fanning its flames. The storm had not broken by nightfall. Sheets of rain battered the windows of County Medical, and thunder rattled the walls as if the sky itself were warning of what was to come. Inside Daniel's room, Michael sat stiff in the chair, his ears tuned to every sound beyond the door. He had made his decision hours ago. Daniel could not stay here another night. Not with compromised staff, not with the man in the ring stalking the hallways like a phantom. Detective Gran. T arrived just past 9, his coat soaked through, his jaw clenched. He closed the blinds tightly before speaking. "The transfer team is ready. Unmarked van, trusted officers, no hospital staff involved. We move him tonight." Michael's relief was short-lived. "The reporters will see us. They have cameras at every door." Grant shook his head. "Not if we use the service tunnels. Old maintenance corridors under the east wing. Half the staff does not even know they exist. We will move him out quietly and get him to a safe house." Michael exhaled slowly, his pulse quickening. "Then let us go. Every hour here is a gamble." But Daniel, who had been awake and listening, clutched Michael's sleeve. His voice was faint, trembling. "He will know. He always knows." Michael bent close, meeting the boy's wide, fearful eyes. "Then let him know. Let him follow. Because this time he will not win." By midnight, the plan was in motion. 2 plainclothes officers stood guard at either end of the hall. Another waited with the gurney. Daniel was bundled carefully in blankets, wires detached, IV lines capped. His body was so light beneath the covers that Michael could have lifted him in his arms, but they needed the illusion of routine transport. The group moved quickly, wheels of the gurney whispering against the tile as they pushed toward the east wing. Grant led, his flashlight cutting through dimly lit corridors that had not seen use in decades. The air smelled of dust and damp plaster, pipes groaning overhead. Each turn of the tunnel felt like a descent deeper into some forgotten underworld. Daniel's small hand clung to Michael's as the gurney rolled forward. His whispers barely rose above the squeak of the wheels. "It is dark again, like before." Michael squeezed his hand firmly. "But this time I am here. You are not alone in the dark." They reached a heavy service door, rust flaking from its hinges. Grant shoved it open with a grunt, revealing a sloping passage that led toward the loading docks. "Almost there," he muttered. But then movement, a sound too deliberate to be the shuffle of rats. A footstep, slow and heavy, echoing through the tunnel ahead. Grant froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his holster. "Stop." The group halted, the gurney wheels squealing softly. Michael's breath caught as his eyes strained against the darkness ahead. At first there was nothing, just dripping pipes, the flicker of a failing light. And then he saw it, a figure standing still in the shadows, the faint gleam of a silver ring catching the light. Michael's blood turned to ice. "Back," Grant ordered, his voice sharp. The officers flanked the gurney, drawing their weapons. "Move him back." But before they could turn, another sound came from behind. A door creaked shut. Footsteps echoed. They were not alone. Michael's heart hammered as realization struck. They were trapped. The figure ahead stepped forward, the outline of his face obscured by shadow. His voice carried through the tunnel, low and calm, yet threaded with menace. "You should not have taken him from the fire." Daniel whimpered, burying his face in Michael's arm. Michael held him tighter, his voice breaking with fury. "You will not touch him again." Grant raised his weapon. "Police, step into the light, hands where I can see them." The man chuckled softly, the sound echoing. "Do you think walls and guns will stop me? The flame does not end. The boy is marked. He is mine." With sudden, terrifying speed, the figure turned and slipped into the shadows. Shots rang out, deafening in the narrow tunnel, but the bullets struck only concrete. At the same instant, the lights flickered violently and went out, plunging the corridor into suffocating darkness. "Flashlights," Grant barked. Beams cut through the black, slicing across rusted pipes and dripping walls, but the figure was gone. Only silence remained. Grant cursed, his voice taut. "Move, get him out now." The group surged forward, pushing the gurney faster down the sloping corridor. Daniel clung to Michael, trembling. He was here, he was right here. Michael whispered fiercely, "And he is gone now. We are getting you out." They burst through another service door onto the loading dock, the storm's rain slashing across their faces. The unmarked van waited, engine running, headlights dimmed. 2 more officers stood ready, scanning the darkness. "Go," Grant ordered. Michael helped lift Daniel into the van, securing him gently on the seat. As the doors slammed shut, Michael slid in beside him, wrapping an arm protectively around the boy's frail shoulders. Grant jumped in after them, giving the driver a sharp nod. "Move." The van lurched forward, tires hissing against the wet pavement. The hospital receded into the storm, its glowing windows shrinking behind them. Michael let out a shaky breath, his body trembling from the adrenaline. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to believe they might age. Ave outrun the shadow. But Daniel's voice pierced the moment, soft and terrified. "He will not stop. Even if we go far away, he will follow. I feel him." Michael tightened his hold. "Then let him follow. Let him try, because he will never take you again." Grant's eyes met Michael's in the dim glow of the van's interior. His voice was grim. This was not a man hunting alone. This was an organization. And if they want him this badly, then Daniel's survival threatens something far bigger than we know. The van sped through the storm, but in Michael's chest the dread deepened. The red-ringed man had nearly taken Daniel in the bowels of the hospital, and though they had escaped for now, Michael knew the truth: this was not an ending. It was only a pause before the next strike. And somewhere, in the labyrinth of rain-soaked streets, the man with the red ring watched their taillights fade, his smile as cold as the fire he promised. The storm had followed them out of the city, its thunder rolling across the hills as if determined to chase the van wherever it went. The unmarked vehicle cut through sheets of rain, its wipers thrashing furiously, headlights struggling against the darkness. Michael sat pressed against Daniel, his arm wrapped protectively around the boy, feeling the fragile rise and fall of his breathing. Across from them, Detective Grant scrolled through messages on a secure phone, his expression carved with grim determination. They drove for nearly an hour before the van turned off the main road, winding through backwoods until a cabin appeared, half hidden among the trees. The safe house was modest, a dark silhouette of timber and stone, but it was isolated, fortified, and most importantly, unknown to the outside world. "Here," Grant said sharply, "no one can find him here, not unless they are already inside our circle." The officers unloaded quickly, ushering Michael and Daniel into the cabin. The boy blinked sleepily, his body heavy with exhaustion, but his grip on Michael's sleeve never loosened. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and dust. A wood stove glowed faintly in the corner, the only warmth against the chill of the storm. For the first time in days, Michael felt the tension in his chest loosen. He laid Daniel gently on a cot near the stove, pulling blankets up around his small frame. The boy stirred, whispering, "It is quiet here." Michael smoothed his hair back. "Yes, you can rest now." But even as he spoke, Grant paced the room, his phone still in his hand. His voice was low but urgent. "I have been piecing it together. The order never died. They adapted. They use hospitals, funeral homes, cremation centers, places where death passes without question. They decide who dies, when, and how. And children," his jaw tightened. "Children are part of something ritualistic to them, something about purity, rebirth through flame." Michael's blood ran cold, and Daniel was one of them. Grant nodded, but he survived. That makes him dangerous, a living witness, and the man with the ring will not allow that. The words had barely left his mouth when the sound came, a knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate taps that echoed against the storm. Everyone froze, the officers reached for their weapons. Michael's pulse thundered as he pulled Daniel closer. The boy's eyes fluttered open, wide with fear. "It is him," he whispered. "I know it is him." Grant motioned for silence. He crept to the window, peering through the rain-slicked glass. At first, he saw nothing but darkness. Then, faintly illuminated by a flash of lightning, a figure stood at the tree line. A pale face, half-shadowed. A hand raised slightly, the gleam of a silver ring catching the stormlight. Grant cursed under his breath. He found us. The next moments unfolded in chaos. The door shuddered as if struck by an unseen force. The windows rattled violently. Daniel cried out, his body trembling under the blankets. Michael stood in front of him, his own body a shield, shouting above the storm, "You will not have him." Grant and the officers fired warnings into the night, but the figure remained at the edge of the trees, unmoved, untouched by the flashes of gunfire. His voice carried through the storm, calm, chilling, almost reverent. "The fire cannot be cheated. He belongs to the flame. Give him to me, and the rest of you will walk away." Michael's fury erupted, his voice raw, "Over my dead body." The man chuckled softly, the sound cutting through thunder. "So be it." The lights in the cabin flickered, then died, plunging the room into darkness. The storm outside roared louder, as if feeding the terror within. Michael clutched Daniel tightly, whispering, "Do not be afraid. I am here. I will never let him take you." But then the window shattered. Glass exploded inward, shards scattering across the floor. One of the officers was pulled violently into the dark with a strangled cry, his flashlight clattering uselessly against the ground. Grant fired into the night, his voice sharp, "Stay back." But the red-ringed man was inside now, his presence overwhelming the room. He moved with eerie calm, his eyes fixed on Daniel. The silver ring gleamed like a drop of blood in the flickering lightning. Michael stepped between them, his body trembling but unyielding. "You will not touch him." The man tilted his head, studying him. "You cannot stop what is written. The flame consumes all. Step aside." Michael shook his head fiercely. "Then it will consume me first." Something flickered across the man's face, a momentary recognition, a pause. Then his eyes hardened. He reached forward, his pale hand stretching toward the boy. Grant lunged, tackling him against the wall. The two men crashed to the ground, the struggle violent and desperate. The ringed man fought with a strength that seemed inhuman, his hand gripping Grant's throat. Michael leapt forward, tearing at the man's arm, prying him away. Daniel cried out, his small voice breaking through the chaos. And then something unexpected. The boy, weak as he was, reached out from the cot and pressed his trembling hand against the man's. For a moment, the room seemed to still. Daniel's voice, soft but steady, cut through the storm. "You will not have me." The man recoiled as though burned. His eyes widened, the calm veneer cracking. The red stone in the ring gleamed unnaturally bright, then fractured with a sharp crack, splitting down the middle. A sound like a hiss escaped his throat, and for the first time, fear flashed in his eyes. Grant seized the moment, driving him back toward the shattered window. With one final shove, the man toppled into the storm, his figure vanishing into the darkness beyond the trees. Silence followed, broken only by Daniel's ragged breathing and the hammer of rain against the cabin roof. Michael collapsed beside the boy, gathering him into his arms. "It is over," he whispered, though his voice shook. "It is over." Grant stood at the shattered window, his chest heaving, his weapon still raised. But the figure was gone. No body, no trace. Only the storm remained. Hours later, when dawn finally broke, the rain ceased and pale light filtered through the ruined cabin. The officers secured what was left of the safe house, but no one found the red-ringed man. Daniel slept at last, his small body curled against Michael's chest. The boy's face was peaceful, as if, for the first time, the shadows no longer clawed at his dreams. Grant sat heavily at the table, exhaustion lining his features. "We did not kill him," he said quietly, "but we broke something. That ring, it meant more than jewelry. It was power, and now it is gone." Michael stroked the boy's hair, his voice low but resolute. "Then he cannot have him anymore. Not now, not ever." For a long moment, the only sound was Daniel's soft breathing. Then Grant spoke again, his tone firm. "This is not the end. The order is still out there, but Daniel is proof they can be resisted. That makes him more important than ever." Michael's eyes never left the boy. He is not just proof, he is hope. And as the storm clouds finally parted, a fragile ray of sunlight spilled across the cabin floor, casting its warmth over the boy who had once been left to burn. The boy who had woken in the fire and survived. If this story gripped you as much as it gripped me, make sure you hit that like button so more people can see it. And do not forget to subscribe, because there are even more unbelievable true stories waiting for you right here. What do you think? Was the man with the red ring part of something even bigger? Let me know in the comments below. I am reading every single one of them. And if you are ready for another chilling case that will leave you speechless, just click the story on your screen now. I will see you there.